All right, we're starting?
What do you think?
I don't know.
This is Phil.
Hi.
He's one of my oldest friends and a pretty smart fella.
Welcome to Hobby with...
Well, most of the time. But when presented with something as huge in scope as the Warhammer 40,000 hobby for the first time, it can be difficult to know where to start.
Borderline impossible.
In this series, I'll be taking him from green as grass recruit to fully fledged battle commander by helping him build and paint his first models and then play his first games of Warhammer 40,000. All the while giving new players some tips on how to start your own hobby journey and veterans some advice on how to immerse your friends into this amazing universe in time for the upcoming 10th edition.
Welcome to Warhammer 40k Hobby Bootcamp. Are you ready, maggot, for the boot camp? So in this first episode, what we're going to be dealing with, Phil, is introducing you to some of the parts of the hobby. Now, what's your understanding of Warhammer so far?
It's very limited. I know a little bit about a guy called Horus, who apparently did some bad things.
Quite bad, yeah.
Quite bad, yeah.
Not exactly what we wanted.
There's not a lot of peace
Yeah.
in the universe, so that's probably the extent of my knowledge.
Phil is one of my oldest friends. We've known each other for 10 years?
Oh God, has it been that long?
It has really.
Oh God.
Phil's not exactly a complete beginner.
I think what really got us, or at least got me into it, was Blood Bowl.
Yeah.
I think that was the original game that we played together. Blood Bowl is just tons of fun. It's chaos, carnage.
So the first thing we needed to do was come up with an army that you were interested in playing. What was the faction that you decided on for this project?
So I went a bit rogue and I went with the Tau, mostly because they had a very nice and cool aesthetic. They looked very cool, very modern, very sleek. And I think they were one of the sort of less represented factions, the less popular factions, so I thought I'd go against the grain and try building a Tau army.
Now the first thing that we decided to do with the Tau was to get Phil a box of fire warriors.
Hot fire warriors.
So in this first episode, what we're going to be doing is building up that first squad, and also talking a little bit about getting into the lore of 40k.
So, what are we waiting for? Let's go.
Let's get cracking.
Let's get cracking.
I did a bit of a super coup. I picked
Super coup.
up a £5 codex. It's coming to the end of 9th edition. As such, the codex rules are going to be pretty much irrelevant soon. But the lore is going to be eternal. It was always going to be a good way of getting some ideas for your army, getting some paint scheme ideas. What have you kind of learned in your first preliminary scoutings about the Tau?
Well, let me tell you about the greater good.
You can't stop him, actually. He's been talking non-stop about the greater good for the last week.
I think they're underdog status. I think they're kind of caught between this massive war, seemingly. Like, they're caught in several massive wars. You've got the Tyranids and the Imperium, and they're just kind of doing their own thing. Just very quickly realised that actually nobody in this universe is particularly good. That was sort of lesson number one.
You were reading all about Commander Farsight.
Commander Farsight, yeah. He disappeared, and then a long time afterwards they found him, and turns out he started his own sort of separate Tau society without the ruling class.
I know of the Tau, I know some of the bits about them, but I've never actually explored the lore or even very many of the models. So it's quite exciting for me to secondhand kind of get that reflected greater good glory.
Greater good glory.
Yeah. How did you find the process of building?
Very unintuitive at first. Like, you see the box, and the box looks nice and neat, and they're all painted up beautifully, and you kind of think, oh, great, I'm going to open the box, and it's just grey plastic. And I think that is a very daunting feeling at first.
For any beginners starting out in the hobby, I would recommend picking up some basic troops first. They tend to be some of the better value for money kits you can get from Games Workshop, but also, as Phil says here,
I think a lot of the models in this set were very similar.
Yeah.
So once you got the hang of how to build the first one, building the rest was quite quick.
let's go through the contents of a standard kit. First off, you've got the plastic components for your models, all held on a plastic structure called a sprue. You'll also get bases for all the models, and this Tau Fire Warriors kit actually comes with flying bases for the drones.
Yes, because I have seen them on some of your videos. You stick these into here, and then you have a model that levitates, a flying model. You've got some cool drones flying around.
Yeah, but these are the drones. So these are for the drone models.
Drones.
You've got transfer decals, which are small water transfer stickers, a bit like temporary tattoos that I used to get when I was a kid. These are going to go on after the painting process, so set them aside for now. Lastly, you've got the all-important build guide, and I'm going to provide Phil with some tools to get started.
First off, you're going to need these.
Sweet, okay.
Snips, sprue cutters. Let's snip out one, and we'll snip out part number 90 for the first gun drone.
Yep.
What I recommend you do is you take your sprue cutters, put the flat edge as close up to the edge of the model as possible.
Get like that.
Okay, and now hard snip. That's it, done.
Nice.
When you're snipping models off the sprue, you'll always be left with a little bit of plastic or flash on the edge. The closer you can get to the part when snipping, the less cleanup you'll need to do later.
So what you want to do is you want to remove that flash from the outside of the model. And the reason why Phil's sounding a little bit nervous is because I'm currently brandishing this knife. You want to find one of these little bits. You want to take your knife, and probably the safest thing is just to scrape over the edge. If you do that, you should end up with a smoother edge. You don't need it to be absolutely completely uniform, and in fact, you're never really going to get it to be the same as the plastic to either side. But what you want to make sure is that when we put paint on it, it's small enough that you won't notice, which actually this probably is now. Now, if you've got bigger chunks, you may need to do a little bit of a maneuver where you kind of direct the knife and then gently pull towards. Now, you want to be careful with that because you don't want to cut yourself. And go around the edge of that there. Just be very careful with your knife.
With a bit of knife control under our belt, let's now have a look at how we can stop parts pinging off of the sprue when snipping.
What you notice there is that it pinged off, okay, so as you kind of snipped it.
Oh, that's not a good sign.
One way to avoid it is when you're snipping, so let's say we were snipping out the next bit, I would hold the actual piece itself.
Oh, right, okay, that makes sense.
So you hold the piece itself, you make your snips, and then that way it doesn't have anywhere to ping once you've snipped the last one. So you can go around, clip all of them, and when you come to the last one, just hold it. Yeah.
Cool.
While Phil cleans up the antenna for the drone, make sure you give him some love in the comments down below as he embarks on this journey, as he's going to need all the help he can get for the next step, plastic glue.
You were quite excited to get to fuse plastic together, right?
Sounds exciting. Is in fact horrifying.
It is exciting.
True,
but is also horrifying.
Also, yeah.
When you first get started, what most people tend towards is they'll buy everything from Games Workshop. They sell their own plastic glue at a vast expense, might I add. But what I'd always recommend is to look around and see that there are other hobby products that will do the same job, but for a fraction of the price, and sometimes they'll even do a better job. So we used Tamiya plastic cement.
Yeah, because it has a really fine little tip, and that allowed you to be really detailed and careful about where you wanted to apply it.
One of the key things for beginners, they apply way too much of this stuff. You'll end up with kind of uneven texture. It's actually melting the plastic. So you do want to make sure that you're careful as possible. And the applicator on the Tamiya, I think, is really amazing.
Yeah,
it just makes it so much easier. One thing I did notice was after you built some of yours, some of the bits did fall off. Because you were being very, very cautious with applying it. Almost you went from one end of the spectrum, which is you might end up putting too much on, to putting too little on. So there's a happy medium.
There's a happy medium. I think when Ollie said it literally melts the plastic together, my brain went, oh god, don't melt your hand into the plastic. So be really careful and really sparing. But
you can't melt your hand, fortunately. You were pleased to know that you couldn't melt your hand to the plastic. In some ways it's easier to use than super glue because you don't have the risk of sticking your own fingers to it, which I know is the bane in my life when using super glue. Now, we did have to use super glue for some of the parts.
We stuck it to the bases with super glue, and then I also toppled my models over from their bases a lot.
Super glue can be a little bit fiddly to work with, so once you've got a good stick, avoid touching the parts while the glue is setting. I also recommend using a gel super glue like Gorilla Glue Gel, as its extra viscosity will help with keeping parts in place while they stick.
So I found the little bits and parts really hard to find at times. They had these numbers, but they were in no sort of logical order. So you're kind of looking at 3 or 4 different sprues, constantly trying to find the little bits.
Now, I think the way that Games Workshop organises their sprues is that they try and keep bits for individual models close together, but it's not consistent. And I think for a beginner, it can be really tricky. Just make sure you're really clearly reading those instructions. And if you are the responsible adult, as I was in this particular process, make sure that you are guiding your young charge to make sure they're getting everything off the right sprues. We're here to enjoy the process of building. You don't want to rush it. You will end up with a nicer result if you take your time. If you wanted to keep track of Phil and his journey through 40k, through the grim darkness of the far future.
Sounds delightful.
What can
Who wouldn't want to follow that?
Yeah, what can the people do, Phil, if they want to follow your journey?
They might click the subscribe button and subscribe to Hobby with Ollie.
Yeah, I heard that if you subscribe to Hobby with Ollie, your beginner painting skills are going to improve twofold in a fortnight.
Automatically.
Yeah. If this is going to be your first edition of Warhammer 40,000 when 10th edition rolls around, then first off, welcome to the hobby. If you're looking at getting some discounts on your hobby supplies, I recommend checking out Element Games. I have an affiliate link in the description down below. If you click onto that, then you'll get a discounted price on Games Workshop products compared with selling from them directly. And also, I'll get a small kickback on anything you purchase at no additional cost to you.
Sounds like a great deal.
It really helps out the channel, so thank you to everyone who has used those Element Games affiliate links. That's all we've got time for today, but stay tuned for the next episode. In the meantime, my name has been Ollie.
My name has been Phil.
This has been my hobby, and we'll see you next time. Nice, nailed it, first time.
Smashed it.
You're a professional, mate.
Absolutely, could start my own YouTube channel.